Hello, everyone. Here are the latest important developments analyzed today. Shocking events at the Kremlin, Putin unexpectedly humbles himself, and the return of Prigozhin's specter. Why did the usually tough Putin suddenly change his attitude toward his rival Zelensky just as Russia's internal situation descended into chaos? A terrifying secret is forcing the FSB to urgently re-examine Graves, as rumors that the Wagner boss is still alive are shaking the very foundations of power in Moscow. Breaking news, Russia's rear is now the front line as the superpower struggles. While billions are spent on the battlefield, hundreds of thousands of Russians in the heart of bomber territory face unimaginable hardship, pollution, and a collapsed social welfare system. How long can Moscow hold out when Ukraine's attacks have reached the very heart of the tank industry in the distant Irkutsk region? With the critical Tormir artery cut off, Armenia is now in the crosshairs of death. The battle to retake Crimea is entering its most brutal phase as Russia's only supply route has officially been shattered by suicide drones. Amid the deadlock, Mr. Putin seems to have found a new scapegoat. Is Armenia following in Ukraine's footsteps and becoming the next bloody battlefield in the Kremlin's ambitions? Here are the details and in-depth analysis. Breaking news: Putin is uneasy after the Iranian strike, and he is furious, threatening to wipe out Armenia. Ladies and gentlemen, the global geopolitical chessboard is witnessing calculated moves as well as undeniable setbacks from the Kremlin. President Vladimir Putin seems to be sending new signals as he declares his readiness for direct talks with his Ukrainian counterpart. A ridiculous shift in diplomatic language, when the person once insulted by Moscow as the leader of a gang of addicts is now politely addressed by Mr. Putin as Sir. However, behind this forced politeness, troops are beginning to cast their shadow over another land, Armenia. While the Crimean Peninsula is gradually becoming a target in the counteroffensive, the Ukrainian army is striking lightning blows at the very weak points that the Russians least expect. Right in the midst of that tense atmosphere, the presence of Prigozhin at the parade ceremony and the red alert status of the Federal Security Service, the FSB, have exposed deep cracks within Russia itself. Even in POM, people can no longer remain silent. They have begun to express doubts and share bitter thoughts about the reality of the war after the attacks targeting their homeland. Russian society today seems to be divided between a segment that blindly accepts submission and the harsh realities being exposed in the media. Even the most loyal voices of the propaganda machine can no longer continue to lie. They openly criticize the weakness of the Russian air defense system and bitterly admit that they need to learn how the Ukrainians operate. Vladimir Solovyov, one of the faces representing Kremlin media, is falling into a state of real panic. How could a slow-flying object travel 1,200 kilometers straight to Yekaterinburg without being detected? There is only one possible explanation. There have been false reports and deception right within the command ranks. Meanwhile, the Russian Orthodox Church made a controversial statement, blaming democratic values as the root cause of the war. The incident at Engel Air Base also became a source of deep embarrassment, as both military personnel and civilians had to suffer terrible consequences from poor management. But the propaganda machine still tries to paint a picture of unstoppable greatness of Russia. We are standing at the threshold of a new special military operation, or more accurately, an endless expansionist ambition. President Putin seems to be overly confident in his power. Right after the parade, he did not hesitate to make direct threats against Armenia. Their only crime may be the desire to live a normal life, free from Moscow's influence. Russia is forcing Armenia to hold a referendum before it can join the European Union. According to observers, this is a staged act in the name of respecting the people in order to carry out a calculated separation. Putin reminded Armenia that this scenario had happened in Ukraine, which also started with the desire to join Europe and ended in a bloody conflict. This is not just a warning, but an outright threat that any country daring to turn its back on Russia will have to pay the price with its own stability. The brazenness of the Russian propaganda machine goes even further by calling Armenia's actions ingratitude of a country that has saved their lives many times. Arguments about protecting the Russian community and national interests in Armenia are once again being used to pave the way for future military interventions. Putin has inadvertently confirmed a bitter truth. Attacking Ukraine was not because of distant security reasons, but simply because they wanted to join the European Union. Every event, from the coup, the Crimea story, to the conflict in eastern Ukraine, is just a pawn in a bigger plan to block Western influence. Before the invasion took place, the powerful man in the Kremlin once stated that he had no complaints about Ukraine. But then he himself created rules about NATO not expanding as an excuse to flatten cities. Now that scenario is repeating with Finland, with Russia seeing enemies everywhere, even though in reality Finland and Russia have had no territorial disputes for decades. Finland joining NATO is a legitimate act of self-defense in response to the unpredictability of its neighbor. But Moscow sees it as a betrayal. The promises about NATO not expanding eastward were just empty words with no signed documents or legal commitments, but they are still used as fuel for the machine. It's time to face the truth that no country is obligated to ask Putin for permission to develop their own nation. After the bold statements about capturing Kyiv in 3 days, now the Kremlin's attitude has changed 180 degrees. From calling on Ukrainian soldiers to overthrow the fascist gang, Mr. Putin is now stooping to seek a direct meeting with Mr. Zelensky. The demilitarization that Russia promised seems to be happening in a completely opposite way. And the question of who truly has justice on their side in this war has been answered more clearly than ever before. What is really happening on the Russian home front? Could it be that Mr. Putin's powerful suitcases are no longer enough to cover up the cracks that are growing bigger and bigger? The irony of history is clear when Mr. Zelensky, who was once looked down on by Moscow, now makes the Kremlin restless. Even though Ukraine did not launch a direct attack on Moscow during the tense parade, the anxiety was still evident on the faces of the Russian leaders. A new air defense ring is being hastily set up around the capital, centered on modern missile and Pantsir anti-aircraft artillery systems. But are these layers of iron armor enough to ease the fear of a sky that is no longer peaceful? Propaganda expert Ilya Vymoslov bitterly admitted that Putin missed the golden opportunity to end the war from a position of advantage. That was when Russia still had the advantage on the battlefield, and Donald Trump was pressuring Zelensky at the White House. The Kremlin gambled everything on an absolute victory, and now, as time goes by, the conditions for peace will become harsher, and the thunderous strikes from behind the front lines will become even more devastating. Russia now seems to have no concept of a safe rear area. Putin's assertions of an overwhelming victory are gradually becoming out of touch with the harsh reality that people in Perm and many other cities have to face. A painful truth is gradually dawning on the public. The red lines that Moscow kept drawing now no one cares about anymore. That is the tragedy of a society imprisoned by their television sets, where TV is considered the voice of truth and power. A large portion of the people seem to have forgotten how to think independently. They are reluctant to seek out diverse sources of information and only know how to bow before the stick of authority. Instead of finding strategic solutions, local authorities just restrict people's rights. Prepare to stash cash in bags and get ready for the scenario of banks collapsing. A bleak future is looming as even the most loyal voices have begun to doubt the fate of this nation. While Moscow is busy with patriotic rituals, Ukraine has quietly built a modern defense and warning system that even writers like Solovyov secretly admire. It's ridiculous that those who once claimed they would capture Kyiv in 3 days now have to call for learning from their opponent. How could a slow-moving flying object travel 1,200 kilometers straight to Yekaterinburg without being detected? The only answer can be systematic deception in military reports. The heart of Russia's defense industry, Urals, where main battle tanks are forged, is no longer invulnerable. The vital oil and gas extraction and transportation facilities of the economy are now in the sights of hundreds of drones every night. From just 100 now, the enemy can launch up to 300 strikes in a single night. This nightmare is no longer unfamiliar. It has become a part of daily life from the outskirts of Moscow to the distant autonomous region of Khanty-Mansisk. The sound of missile alarms rings out like a fateful, mournful tune. Even veteran military bloggers like Maxim Kalashnikov have begun to feel that something is wrong with this special military operation. Slogans about denazification and calls for unity and Victory Day seem to be nothing more than the last ideological trap. It is a bitter admission that the Russian elite has completely lost hope for a glorious end to this war. War is no longer a walk in the park. It has become a quagmire swallowing all illusions of the greatness of an empire. There is not much time left for us to wait, and the question is why the faces in the Kremlin have become so gloomy. Isn't everything still going according to the plan that Mr. Putin once declared? Or has reality turned in a different direction that they can no longer control? In this fierce information war, every voice becomes a weapon, and protecting objective truth from the Ukrainian battlefield has become more urgent than ever to illuminate the dark corners of a system that is cracking. Amid the geopolitical storm, Russia's spiritual leaders have given far-fetched explanations. The Archbishop of the Russian Orthodox Church has long blamed all misfortunes on so-called democracy. In their view, over the past 3 decades, Russia's attempts to adopt Western values, from human rights to democratic institutions, have been a deadly mistake that caused them to lose their identity and traditions. But ironically, the truth is, they never really embraced democracy. And now the price for that half-heartedness is evident across all regions of Russia. Look at Engels, a symbolic but also tragic place. This is where billion-dollar strategic bombers take off, carrying expensive missiles to rain down on Ukraine. However, directly under those flying fortresses, the regime's citizens are made to live in total humiliation and misery. Money is poured into military equipment, but not a single cent is spent on maintaining basic infrastructure. The people of Engels have to wade through foul sludge and walk on makeshift wooden planks just to get to the hospital or take their children to school. The stench from broken sewage pipes covers residential areas, turning the lives of 200,000 people into a prolonged nightmare as their clean water supply is completely cut off. The collapse of the social welfare system is not limited to Engels. In Batayevo and Bodobo, a utility disaster is unfolding quietly but fiercely. People face cold and a lack of clean water when floating pump stations are stranded by drifting ice, shutting down the machinery system entirely. While the Kremlin is still basking in the glory of parades, in Bodobo, people have to fight for every bottle of water as prices skyrocket by the minute. It's a bitter reality, a superpower trying to impose a new world order, yet powerless to provide even the most basic needs for its own citizens. Amid the fake heroic atmosphere of the parade, the event made the Federal Security Service, the FSB, shudder in fear. The fighters from the Wagner group, a force thought to have been disbanded, still marched openly with portraits of Yevgeny Prigozhin. The song's rising and defiant unity fueled persistent rumors that Putin's chef might still be alive and secretly orchestrating a massive coup. The FSB is urgently investigating, even considering exhuming the grave to verify the truth, while also cracking down on anyone daring to use Wagner's symbols. The ghost of Prigozhin, whether alive or dead, remains an unpredictable card ready to shake the foundations of Russian power at any moment. The security system's fear of old symbols reveals a reality that beneath the appearance of stability lies an instability waiting to erupt. Is Gyomir really making a comeback? While Mr. Putin is still engrossed in his victory speeches on Russian media channels, war correspondents are constantly lamenting a harsh reality. The Ukrainian army is concentrating its firepower, delivering deadly blows to the key supply routes leading to the peninsula. The Taganzok-Zhangkoi highway, once considered the main artery running through strategic cities like Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and Henichesk, is no longer a safe rear area. Ukraine's unmanned aerial vehicles have begun to reach these most critical logistical arteries. The entire supply line for the Russian army, which once relied completely on this road, is now at risk of being cut off. Those mechanical phantoms silently approach without a sound, with just a small engine on their side, enough to spread terror. They are flying, heading straight toward their target in the vast open sky. Not long ago, the Azov Regiment released footage showing drone strikes destroying Russian equipment right in the occupied Mariupol area. Clearly, these developments were never part of the Kremlin's perfect plan. The irony and tragedy are also vividly reflected in the strange images from Russia's Victory Day celebration, a setting that could be described as the early days of a spiritual epidemic. The military parade took place in a haunting atmosphere as veterans of the so-called Endless Special Military Operation were brought out to the square. It was a heartbreaking sight to see young soldiers in wheelchairs participating in an event that was supposed to be full of vitality. In Tatarstan, a unit from the State Fund for Operation participants, called Defenders of the Fatherland, marched under the leadership of Sergeant Viktor Mikhailovich Shakilov. It's both ridiculous and painful that the demilitarization process promised by Mr. Putin is now manifesting in the form of Russian soldiers' bodies that are no longer whole. Even in Berlin, another play is being staged as pro-Russian supporters protest in an extreme manner. They burn and shout about suffering, questioning why their soldiers have to fall while nuclear weapons remain unused in storage. Strangely, they only show this aggression in Germany, not in their own homeland. Slogans about President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin not taking a single step back and cheers for the glory of Russia sound out of place amid the harsh reality. In Orion, they even organized a bizarre performance involving divers carrying framed photos of soldiers from the Great Patriotic War. A pointless play, but there was no audience. Only a few staff members, rescue workers, and volunteers stood watching from the shore. The ceremony was awkwardly arranged somewhere between Divers' Day and Victory Day, lacking any public sympathy. Perhaps, if they had emerged from the dark underground sewers, the event would have been a more genuine symbol of the current situation. It seems as if an omen from above was sent to the participants of the motorbike parade in the Perm region, reminding them of the irreparable cracks within a faltering empire. How do you assess Mr. Putin's sudden change in attitude when he referred to President Zelensky as Sir? In your opinion, if the rumors that Prigozhin is still alive are true, how drastically will the internal situation in Russia change in the near future?